In this video, we're going to take a look at the hips and shoulders and torso in general. So the first thing is just kind of noticing the angle of the body. So you can see that the torso is kind of leaned forward. It's not hunched over, so depending on the type of character you're looking to do, it's not extreme, but I would say it's leaned in a bit. So I'll just start by leaning it in. These back controllers are good for lean, so just grab the bottom one and just kind of lean that forward. Again, it doesn't have to be extreme. Like this is just very stiff, and this feels like a little bit more of sort of a forward motion without leaning it in too much. Again, if you really pile these on, you end up with a much more sort of crumpled over look, and that's not what I'm looking for. So whatever's right for the character, but a little bit of lean in the direction of travel is a good idea. Now on the hips, you have two different options for how you're going to do this motion. This outer controller here controls everything above it. So if I rotate this, the shoulders go along for the ride. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with using this control. Sometimes using this control will create some additional motion through the torso that's actually a really good thing. But what you'd need to do is counter-rotate that by going past where it was at center, because this is kind of moving the shoulders off center, and you want the chest to kind of keep pointing in the direction of travel, so not such a big swing back and forth. So when I do this, I have to counter rotate more back the opposite direction. Again, sometimes that can be a really positive thing and create really nice animation. But there is another one here, so I want to make sure I show both. So this sort of more local pelvis control here, when you rotate that, it just controls the hip and part of the torso. So you see you would have that, and then you would rotate this back the opposite direction. So you end up with a little less motion up here, which is sometimes a good thing. Either one can work, and I'd advise you to sort of experiment with both of those as options. But in this particular case, I'll just use the local control. I do want to point out one thing though, as I do this rotation, and notice that I have my auto key is turned on. I didn't mention that in the last video, but this little red tick down here, that means that whenever I make an update here, it keys it at this time frame. So what you want to do with the hips is rotate them forward, and it doesn't have to be extreme. Like this is going to be overdone almost certainly, and then down here. But notice, actually, it looks like I've already switched this to Gimbal Mode. Let me just put it back into Object. So by default, this will be in Object Mode, and this is a Control Right Shift click menu, by the way, and you can get the same thing by double-clicking and changing your axis orientation here. But in Object Mode, if I rotate this forward on Y and then down on Z, what you'll see is X is also affected by that. You see there's an X value here. So there are a couple different ways that you can mess with this. First of all, the order of rotations on the hips is not really set up to be ideal, because in this particular case, there's going to be a substantial amount of motion on Y and on Z, but not much on X. So the default, which let me just show you this over here on the transform, the rotate order for this is X, Y, Z. And really, what you want to do with order of rotation is put the least used axis in the middle. So that's where Gimbal Lock comes from, is what happens on the middle axis. So in this particular case, if I were just to put ZXY, for instance, it doesn't so much matter in this case which is first, Z or Y. And basically, just to go into this for 1 second, these read backwards. So this is the parent, this X would be the child, and then Z would be the grandchild. So but the biggest, most important thing to be concerned with here is that the least used axis goes in the middle. So that's one thing that I would change about this kind of straight away. And that same thing would be here as well. So I just put X in the middle. So whichever one of those controls you used, it would end up being correct. This one, it's the same thing. Now this is not going to, there's such small motion in this that those changes are not going to be hugely important for this animation, but I'm just showing you that sometimes you need to come and look here, especially if you're seeing changes across channels that you haven't been manipulating. Now, that said, that can still happen with the correct order of rotation, and it will happen with the correct order of rotation. Gimbal Lock is a real thing with Euler rotation. So there's a mode here. If you just switch Control Shift right click and switch this to Gimbal Mode, then this updates to what is going on internally with these axes. And so I can show you really quickly, because I mentioned this but didn't really show it. So this is Y, X, and then Z. So when I move Y axis, X and Z will both update. When I move the X axis, only Z will update and Y will be left up there. And this is why you want to put that middle axis as the one that's least used, because this is how you create Gimbal Lock and also a really awesome looking mesh. But when those things are together, you can see I lose the axis up here. Now, if you look at this in object mode, that axis will still be there, and so it can be confusing. But what happens is, in order to achieve the pose that this axis allows, it has to manipulate two of the other, sometimes all three of the other, in order to achieve that pose. So, so that's what's happening under the hood as these things get moved around. But basically what I would recommend is if you use Gimbal Mode, it will help isolate out those motions. So let me just show you the exact same thing. So I'll just kind of rotate that forward again. This is probably going to be overdone, but the hip position should look something like this. So the hips favor the forward foot and down on the forward foot as well. Right, and so actually just before I even key that, let's just watch the hips so you can see why we're going to do this. So you see how static and flat that is, right? It's just going up and down. There's no motion here. Everything is just static and boring here. So it's also not very realistic. But so let me go ahead and rock this forward again and then down a bit. And again, you know, just kind of start with some values. It's very easy to multiply these things into whatever you want. Now, that right there is exactly the same that I would want at 24. So I'll just middle click to 24 and then set both of those. So remember, when you middle click, it updates the frame without changing the viewport, which makes it easy to copy those values across like that. Now I could do the same thing at 12 or just let this be you know, sort of a different kind of step. So I can kind of rotate that here and here. It's something like that anyways. Again, I'm not kind of doing it by the number. I'm not really watching the legs even at this point. But I just want to get the basic hip motion in place. All right, so that's pretty much it. You have those extremes. You can key in others in the middle as needed. But really right now what we're going to have is it's going to switch from that position to that position and then back. So there, it's like which one's forward and which one's down is switching at the contact. So then now if you watch it, there's motion happening here. It's already more interesting. Right? Now on the shoulders, basically the shoulders are just going to be opposite what's going on with the hips. So in this case, the hips are down and pointing forward on this side over here. So I'll just do the opposite with the shoulders. And again, not a lot. Be careful with this because, you know, whatever motion we add in here, we're going to have to counter rotate in the head, and we just don't need that much swing in the upper body, but a little bit is going to look good. So again, this is forward, that means this is back. Right, so just kind of rock that back, and then this is down onto this foot, so that means it needs to be up on this shoulder. Right, so just little bits, and again, that's probably even overdone. You're going to see that, especially because the head is going to be flopping around, you're going to see that quite a lot here. So again, you can round these things, and typically I would, but I'm just going to leave them like this so you can see what it looks like with a little bit of a sloppy number workflow as well. And then I would just counter on this side as well. And something, you know, around the same value is probably going to work well. So I think I had that around 5, something like this. All right, so up onto this side. All right, so that's somewhere around the same value. Yeah, it's very close. So now let's watch what's going on with that. Right, so now it's sort of loosened up. You have a little bit more motion here. It's hard to see some of that motion on this character, but you can see with the wireframe turned on, you get a little bit of that motion happening here. Right, and then I'll deal with the head in another video, but just really quickly, in case you have something that is too extreme or not enough motion in it, once you have those things keyed into place, it's really easy to adjust these things. So if I were to come back in here and grab the thing that's moving. So in this case, it's the Y and Z are the only axes that are doing anything that I care about here. So if I were to grab those, and then this is the value right here. So you can change that by doing times equals and then whatever you want. So if I want it to move more, times equals 2, for instance, that's going to make those values go twice as far. So now that the hips will be moving much more wildly. So you can see how much those hips are swinging. Right, and it's the same thing the other direction. So you would just do a multiply. So just, you know, times equals, you know, 0.5 to bring that back down to where it was, or, you know, whatever other value you want to do. So you just use those same multipliers for the hips and the shoulders and create the motion that you're looking for. Again, in this particular case, I would say that's probably overdone at this point on the hips, and the shoulders are pretty close to where I'd leave them. So I'll probably just revert this back. So I'll just go ahead and do it so you can see where we end up here. So times equals 0.5. And you don't really see the update because this is auto reframing, but you can see the numbers themselves actually update here. But this will put us back into that sort of generic walk where it's not super exaggerated at this point. All right, that's where I'll leave this one, and we'll pick up with something else in the next video.